Keanu Reeves, the world's most beloved action star and undisputed king of kindness, stumbled into the wildest, most jaw-dropping showdown of his life, one so outrageous it would leave millions gasping and the internet ablaze with memes for years to come. It was an afternoon that promised peace but delivered pure pandemonium, a moment so hilariously insane and emotionally charged that it's already being hailed as the greatest clash ever recorded on shaky smartphone screens. Picture this: a serene park, a helpless puppy, and a raging storm of entitlement, all about to collide with Keanu's unshakable cool in a way that would make headlines scream and hearts pound. What happened next was beyond epic, beyond controversial. It was a masterclass in heroism wrapped in a tornado of absurdity, and you're about to find out why everyone's still talking about it. The day began like a scene from a postcard, the kind of afternoon that could lull even the most restless soul into a state of quiet bliss. Santa Monica's Palisades Park stretched out along the cliffs overlooking the Pacific Ocean, its emerald lawns kissed by the late afternoon sun. Seagulls wheeled lazily overhead, their cries mingling with the distant crash of waves against the shore. Children darted across the grass, their laughter weaving through the air like a melody, while couples lounged on checkered blankets, sipping iced coffee and sharing whispered secrets. A soft breeze rustled the palm trees lining the winding paths, carrying the faint scent of saltwater and blooming jasmine. It was paradise, a slice of heaven carved out of the bustling chaos of Lo's Angels. Keanu Reeves moved through this idyllic setting like a shadow of calm, his presence subtle yet magnetic. Clad in a weathered black motorcycle jacket, faded jeans, and boots that bore the scars of countless miles, he was the picture of understated cool. His dark hair fell loosely across his forehead, framing those soulful eyes that had captivated audiences for decades. He wasn't there to draw attention. Keanu never was. This isn't just a story, it's a revelation. And if you want to see how far it goes, subscribe now before it disappears. After a grueling week on a film set, dodging paparazzi and signing autographs for starry-eyed fans, he had come to the park for one reason: solitude. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders relaxed as he ambled along a gravel path, letting the rhythm of the ocean and the chatter of the park wash over him. He paused near a wooden bench overlooking the cliffs, his gaze drifting to the horizon where the sun was beginning to dip, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, to let the weight of fame and expectation slip away. Keanu was a man who cherished the small things, the sound of the wind, the feel of the earth beneath his feet, and this park with its unpretentious beauty felt like a sanctuary. He had no script to memorize, no stunt to rehearse, just the promise of a quiet hour to himself. But fate, as it so often does with Keanu Reeves, had other plans. His sharp eyes caught a flicker of movement near a cluster of low shrubs lining the path. At first, it was nothing more than a rustle, a twitch of leaves that could have been dismissed as a squirrel or a gust of wind. But Keanu's instincts, honed by years of playing heroes on screen and living as one off it, told him otherwise. He squinted, his head tilting slightly as he focused on the spot. There, tangled in the thorny branches of a bush, was a tiny puppy, a scruffy little thing with matted fur the color of caramel and eyes so wide they seemed to plead for help. Its paws scrabbled helplessly against the dirt, its body caught in the prickly grip of the shrub, and a faint, pitiful whimper escaped its throat. Keanu's heart clenched. He had always had a soft spot for animals, a quiet empathy that ran deeper than most people knew. Without a second thought, he stepped off the path, his boots crunching on the dry grass as he approached the struggling pup. The closer he got, the more dire the situation became clear. The puppy's hind leg was twisted awkwardly in the branches, a thin trickle of blood staining its fur where the thorns had bitten into its skin. Its whimpers grew more desperate, its tiny body trembling with fear and pain. Keanu dropped to one knee, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were approaching a wounded soldier on a battlefield. He assessed the scene with the precision of a man who had faced danger countless times, both real and cinematic. The puppy's eyes locked onto his, a silent cry for rescue, and Keanu felt a surge of determination. He couldn't leave it there, not like this. His hands, steady and strong from years of wielding prop guns and steering motorcycles, reached toward the bush. He began to carefully untangle the branches, his fingers working with a gentle urgency to free the trapped leg without causing more harm. The puppy squirmed, its whimpers softening as it sensed help was near, and Keanu's focus narrowed to the task, blocking out the world around him. He was so absorbed in his mission that he didn't notice the storm brewing just a few yards away. Her name would later become infamous, whispered across social media with a mix of scorn and disbelief. But in that moment, she was simply a figure of fury barreling down the path. She was a woman in her late 40s, her blonde hair chopped into a severe bob that framed a face twisted with indignation. Her outfit, a garish floral sundress paired with oversized sunglasses perched atop her head, screamed privilege, and her stride was that of someone who believed the world bent to her will. She had been lounging near a picnic table with a group of friends, sipping a kale smoothie and loudly complaining about the city's leash laws, when she spotted Keanu kneeling by the bush. To her, he wasn't a savior or a celebrity. He was a threat, a stranger meddling with something she decided was her business. She stormed toward him, her flip-flops slapping against the pavement with a rhythm that matched the rising tempo of her outrage. Her arms flailed as she closed the distance, her voice already cutting through the park's tranquility like a chainsaw through silk. She didn't care who Keanu was. Fame meant nothing to her warped sense of justice. In her mind, he was a villain, a trespasser daring to touch a dog she assumed belonged to someone else, someone who hadn't given him permission. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. Keanu, hunched over the puppy, his hands buried in the shrubbery, and the faint sound of the animal's distress fueling her self-righteous fire. Keanu remained oblivious at first, his attention fixed on the puppy. He had nearly freed the little creature, the last of the thorns giving way under his careful pressure, when the woman's shadow fell over him. The air shifted, charged with a sudden hostility that prickled the back of his neck. He sensed her presence before he saw her, his instincts kicking in once more, but he didn't look up, not yet. He stayed focused, easing the puppy's leg free and cradling its trembling body in his hands. The pup licked his fingers, a tiny gesture of trust, and Keanu allowed himself a fleeting moment of relief. That relief shattered as the woman's voice exploded into the air, shrill and accusatory, slicing through the park like a thunderclap. She stood mere feet away, her hands planted on her hips, her face flushed with a rage that seemed to radiate in waves. She pointed a manicured finger at Keanu, her entire body trembling with the force of her conviction. To her, this wasn't a rescue, it was an assault, a crime unfolding in broad daylight, and she was determined to be the hero of her own twisted narrative. Keanu finally lifted his head, his dark eyes meeting hers with a calm that only seemed to enrage her further. He held the puppy gently against his chest, its heartbeat steadying under his touch, but the woman's fury was a runaway train, unstoppable and blind to reason. She advanced, her voice growing louder, drawing the attention of every soul within earshot. Heads turned, phones emerged from pockets, and a crowd began to gather, sensing the spark of something explosive igniting before their eyes. The park, once a haven of peace, was now a stage, and Keanu Reeves was about to face a showdown unlike anything he'd ever encountered, with a puppy's fate and his own legend hanging in the balance. The air in Palisades Park thickened with an electric tension as the woman's voice erupted, a banshee wail that shattered the serene afternoon like glass under a hammer. She towered over Keanu Reeves, her floral sundress billowing in the breeze like a war banner, her face a mask of crimson fury that seemed to pulse with every venomous word she spat. The puppy, cradled tenderly in Keanu's arms, shrank against his chest, its tiny frame trembling as if it could sense the tidal wave of rage crashing toward them. Keanu remained kneeling, his posture steady, his dark eyes lifting slowly to meet hers, a calm lighthouse in the midst of her storm. But that calm only fueled her fire, her indignation flaring brighter as she mistook his silence for defiance. She jabbed her finger toward him, inches from his face, her manicured nail glinting like a dagger in the sunlight. Her voice rose to a piercing shriek, cutting through the park with the force of a siren, accusing him of theft, of trespass, of crimes so absurd they defied logic. She claimed the puppy wasn't his to touch, that he had no right to interfere, her words tumbling over each other in a frantic rush of entitlement. To her, this wasn't a rescue, it was an affront, a personal attack on her warped sense of authority over a public space she decided to claim as her own. Her sunglasses slid from her head, dangling precariously around her neck, but she didn't notice, too consumed by the inferno of her own making. The crowd swelled around them, a ring of onlookers forming like moths drawn to a flame. Phones were raised high, their lenses glinting as they captured every second of the unfolding chaos. Whispers rippled through the gathering. Some recognized Keanu instantly, their gasps of awe mingling with disbelief, while others simply marveled at the spectacle of this woman's meltdown. A teenage girl in a tie-dye shirt elbowed her friend, her voice a hushed squeal as she pointed out the unmistakable figure of the action star, now thrust into a real-life drama. An older man with a gray beard shook his head, muttering about the state of the world, while a young mother clutched her toddler closer, her eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and dread. Keanu rose to his feet with a fluid grace, the puppy still nestled securely against his chest. His motorcycle jacket creaked faintly as he straightened, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow that seemed to momentarily quiet the woman's tirade. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. Keanu Reeves was a man who wielded silence like a weapon, letting her rage crash against his unshakable composure. The puppy's whimpers had softened, its trust in him palpable as it nuzzled closer, its wet nose brushing against the stubble of his jaw. He adjusted his hold, one hand supporting the pup's fragile body, while the other brushed a thorn from its fur, a tender act that stood in stark contrast to the chaos swirling around him. But the woman wasn't deterred. She took a step closer, her flip-flops slapping the ground with a ferocity that matched her escalating fury. Her accusations grew wilder, more unhinged. She claimed he was part of some Hollywood conspiracy, that he'd staged this whole scene for publicity, that he was endangering the puppy by holding it. Her voice cracked under the strain of her own volume, her arms flailing as if she could physically push her delusions into reality. Spittle flew from her lips, catching the sunlight in a grotesque shimmer, and the crowd recoiled slightly, torn between amusement and unease. She was a volcano erupting, spewing molten nonsense, and Keanu was the immovable mountain in her path. His eyes, those deep wells of patience and wisdom, flickered with something new, not anger, not yet, but a quiet resolve. He glanced down at the puppy, its caramel fur matted with dirt and blood, and then back at the woman, her face now inches from his own. The air between them crackled, a standoff poised on the edge of explosion. The crowd held its breath, sensing the shift, their phones trembling in their hands as they waited for what came next. A seagull overhead let out a piercing cry, as if sounding the bell for the next round, and the breeze carried the faint salty tang of the ocean, a reminder of the peace that had been so violently shattered. Keanu took a single step back, not out of retreat but to create space, a deliberate move that seemed to enrage her further. She lunged forward, closing the gap, her hands reaching as if to snatch the puppy from his grasp. It was a reckless move, fueled by blind fury, and the crowd gasped as one, a collective intake of breath that echoed across the park. Keanu's reflexes, sharpened by years of stunt work and martial arts training, kicked in seamlessly. He pivoted slightly, shielding the puppy with his body, his arm curling protectively around the little creature. The woman's hands grasped at air, her momentum throwing her off balance, and she stumbled, her flip-flops catching on the uneven ground. She caught herself just before falling, her face twisting into a snarl as she regained her footing. The humiliation only stoked her rage. her eyes blazing with a manic intensity that made the crowd shift uneasily. She straightened, her chest heaving, and pointed at Keanu again, her voice rising to a pitch that could have shattered glass. She demanded he surrender the puppy, that he step away, that he answer for his actions. Her words a jumbled mess of threats and insults that painted him as everything from a criminal to a monster. The accusations were so over the top, so detached from reality, that a few in the crowd began to snicker, their laughter a nervous release of the mounting tension. Keanu's gaze never wavered. He stood there, a pillar of quiet strength, the puppy safe in his arms, its trembling easing under his steady touch. He didn't need to shout, didn't need to defend himself. His presence alone was a rebuttal to her chaos. You felt that, didn't you? That was no ordinary moment. If it hit you, hit like and let's keep going. But the woman wasn't done. She took a deep breath, her chest swelling as she prepared to unleash another barrage, her fury building to a crescendo that promised to push this confrontation into uncharted territory. The crowd leaned in, their phones poised, sensing that whatever came next would be the moment that defined this clash. A moment so epic, so absurd, it would echo far beyond the cliffs of Santa Monica. And then, just as her voice began to rise again, a new sound cut through the air, a sharp, desperate bark from the puppy, its tiny head lifting as if it too had had enough. The sound jolted the scene, a spark igniting the powder keg, and Keanu's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. The woman froze mid-breath, her mouth open, her rage momentarily derailed by the unexpected interruption. The crowd murmured, a ripple of anticipation spreading like wildfire. Something was about to break, and Keanu Reeves was ready to make sure it wasn't him. The air in the hotel's underbelly was thick with the metallic tang of rust and the faint hum of machinery, a labyrinth of pipes and flickering lights that seemed to pulse in time with the countdown timer on the device. Keanu Reeves crouched beside it, his fingers hovering over the tangle of wires, his breath steady despite the red numbers glaring back at him. 5:42, 5:41, 5:40. He had bought himself a momentary reprieve when he jammed the override switch, but whatever he'd done had only angered the mechanism. It was speeding up now, each second slipping away faster than the last. Sweat beaded on his brow, not from fear, but from the sheer intensity of the moment, the weight of the lives above him pressing down like the concrete walls around him. He stood, his leather jacket creaking softly, and scanned the dimly lit chamber. The device, a sleek cylindrical thing with no clear markings, sat nestled in a corner, its wires snaking into the shadows like veins. He had less than 6 minutes to stop it, to unravel its purpose, or to find another way out of this nightmare. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments he'd uncovered, the cryptic note on the rooftop, the hidden passage behind the service elevator, and now this ticking enigma. It wasn't just a bomb, it couldn't be that simple. There was intent here, a puzzle meant to be solved, and Keanu was determined to crack it. He moved swiftly, his boots silent against the damp floor, tracing the wires as they disappeared into the gloom. The hotel above was a world of luxury, marble floors, chandeliers, oblivious guests sipping cocktails. But down here it was a different beast, a forgotten underbelly where secrets festered. His eyes caught a glint of metal ahead, a panel embedded in the wall, its edges rusted but its surface suspiciously clean. He pried it open with a screwdriver from his pocket, revealing a nest of circuits and a small, blinking display. Another timer synchronized with the device, 5:29, 5:28, 5:27. But beneath it, etched into the metal, was a symbol, a jagged spiral like a storm carved in miniature. It stirred something in him, a flicker of recognition he couldn't place. A sound broke his focus, a sharp clatter, metal on concrete, echoing from the shadows to his left. Keanu froze, his hand instinctively dropping to his side, though he carried no weapon. His years of training kicked in, his body shifting into a stance that was both defensive and ready to strike. The air shifted, carrying the faint scent of cigarette smoke, and then a figure emerged from the darkness. A man, lean and wiry, stepped into the flickering light, his face half hidden by a hood. He wore a maintenance uniform, the hotel's logo stitched crookedly on the chest, but his hands were gloved, and his posture was too tense for a janitor caught off guard. The man stopped a few feet away, his head tilting as he studied Keanu. His eyes gleamed beneath the hood, sharp and calculating like a predator sizing up its prey. He didn't speak, didn't demand answers, just stood there, a cigarette dangling from his lips, the ember glowing faintly in the dimness. Keanu's gaze flicked to the man's hands, nodding the way they hovered near his pockets, the subtle bulge that suggested a concealed tool or a threat. The timer's relentless ticking filled the silence. 5, 14, 5, 13, 5, 12. Time was bleeding away, and this stranger was a variable Keanu hadn't accounted for. He straightened, his presence filling the space, a quiet authority that needed no words. The man's lips twitched, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, and he took a slow drag on his cigarette before flicking it to the ground. The ember sparked against the concrete, a tiny flare in the dark, and then he spoke, his voice low and gravelly, laced with an accent Keanu couldn't pin down. "You're in over your head, Reeves," he said, the words casual but edged with menace. "Should have stayed on the roof, playing hero for the cameras." Keanu's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. This man knew him, knew his name, his actions, and that meant this wasn't a random encounter. The note, the device, the spiral symbol, it was all connected, and this stranger was a piece of the puzzle. But there was no time for questions, no room for hesitation. The timer hit 5:00, the numbers flashing red, a silent scream of urgency. Keanu took a step forward, closing the distance, his voice steady as stone. "Who are you? What is this thing?" The man chuckled, a dry, hollow sound, and pulled something from his pocket, a small remote, its surface worn but its buttons gleaming. He held it up, his thumb hovering over a switch, and the air seemed to tighten around them. "Insurance," he said simply, his smirk widening. "You stop that clock, you might save the guests, but you chase me and I flip this and the whole game changes." He stepped back, retreating into the shadows, his movements fluid, deliberate, like a man who'd played this game before. Keanu's heart thudded, not from panic but from the surge of adrenaline that sharpened his senses. The timer was at 4:49, 4:48, 4:47, the device's hum growing louder, a mechanical heartbeat counting down to chaos. He could stay, try to disarm it, trust his instincts to untangle the wires and circuits. Or he could pursue this man, wrest the remote from him, and force the answers he needed. The choice loomed like a blade, each path fraught with risk, each second a gamble against the lives above. The man's figure was fading into the dark, the faint glow of his cigarette the only marker of his retreat. Keanu's fists clenched, his resolve hardening. He thought of the guests, the families laughing in the lobby, the staff bustling through their shifts, the innocence of a world unaware of the threat beneath their feet. He'd made a promise on that rooftop, a silent vow to protect them, and he wouldn't break it now. But the remote, the insurance, changed everything. If it triggered something worse, something beyond the device, then stopping the timer might not be enough. With a final glance at the ticking numbers 4:35, 4:34, 4:33, Keanu made his choice. He surged forward, his boots pounding the concrete, chasing the shadow into the maze of pipes and darkness. The man's laughter echoed ahead, taunting, leading him deeper into the underbelly. The timer's glow faded behind him, its countdown relentless, but Keanu's focus was singular now. Catch the man, seize the remote, and end this threat before it spiraled beyond his reach. The walls closed in, the air grew colder, and somewhere in the distance, a new sound emerged. A low, ominous rumble, like the hotel itself was waking to the danger below. The air in the hotel's underbelly grew thick with tension as Keanu Reeves stood over the control panel, the faint hum of machinery now a deceptive calm after the storm of alarms. The man lay crumpled against the wall, his twisted smile fading into silence, his final act, pulling the lever, having unleashed a new, unknown threat. The floor beneath Keanu's boots still trembled faintly, a reminder that the danger was far from over. A new countdown had begun, its source hidden somewhere in the labyrinthine depths of the hotel, and Keanu knew he had no time to waste. He scanned the chamber, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The rows of industrial tanks glistening with condensation, the pipes hissing with steam, the control panel's blinking lights now steady but ominous. The spiral symbol etched into the panel caught his attention again, its curves a mocking riddle. He'd used it to stop the first timer, punching in 3, 6, 9, 12 based on its turns, and it had worked, freezing the upstairs device at 2:58. But this new threat was different. A failsafe the man had triggered with his dying breath, and Keanu had no code, no clue, only his instincts to guide him. The chemical scent in the air, sharp like gasoline, gnawed at his senses, a constant warning of the stakes. If those tanks held fuel or something worse, the hotel was a powder keg waiting for a spark. He couldn't let that happen, not with innocent lives upstairs, oblivious to the chaos unfolding beneath their feet. His mind flashed to the woman on the rooftop, her cryptic words, "The storm is coming and you're at its center," and he felt the weight of that prophecy now, a burden he carried alone. Keanu's fingers hovered over the control panel, searching for a reset, an override, anything to stop the new countdown. The display offered no answers, only a steady glow as if mocking his efforts. He turned to the man, his voice low and commanding. "What did you do? Where's the source?" But the man's head lolled to the side, his chest still, his defiance extinguished. Keanu's jaw tightened. He was on his own. A faint sound cut through the silence. A rhythmic ticking, not from the panel but from somewhere deeper in the chamber. He followed it, his boots echoing on the metal grates until he reached a shadowed corner where a small hatch was embedded in the wall. The ticking grew louder as he knelt, his fingers tracing the edges. It was locked, but the spiral symbol was there again, stamped into the metal like a signature. Whoever had designed this nightmare had left their mark everywhere, a trail of breadcrumbs or a taunt. He didn't have time for finesse. Grabbing a rusted pipe wrench from a nearby workbench, Keanu wedged it into the hatch's seam and pried with all his strength. The metal groaned, then gave way with a sharp crack, revealing a tangle of wires and a small digital display. 9:47, 9:46, 9:45. Another timer separate from the device upstairs, counting down to an unknown catastrophe. Below it, a single slot glowed faintly, a keycard reader. Keanu's heart sank. He had no keycard, no way to stop this without one. He patted down the man's body, searching pockets and seams, but found nothing. No card, no note, only the remote he'd already taken, now useless in his hand. His mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The man had said, "The real game starts now," and this was it. A second layer of the plan, a backup to ensure destruction even if the first failed. But where was the key? A memory flickered. The mysterious man's taunting laughter as he'd fled through the passage, the way he'd lingered by the rusted door before pressing the remote's secondary button. Keanu's gaze snapped back to the passage he'd come through, the door now sealed shut. He sprinted back, his pulse pounding, and examined the frame. There, tucked into a narrow crevice beside the door, was a glint of plastic, a keycard, hidden in plain sight, dropped or planted by the man during the chase. He snatched it, the spiral symbol embossed on its surface, and raced back to the hatch. The timer read 8:32 as he slid the card into the slot. The display beeped and a new message flashed. Manual override activated. Disarm sequence initiated. The ticking slowed, then stopped, the numbers freezing at 8:29. Relief surged through him, but it was fleeting. The lights in the chamber flickered, and a deep rumble echoed from somewhere above. A sound too big, too alive to be just machinery. Keanu straightened, his senses on high alert. The hotel was waking up, its secrets stirring, and he was still at the heart of it. The man's words echoed in his mind. The people who set this up, they're playing a bigger game. And now Keanu felt the scope of it, a conspiracy sprawling beyond this basement, beyond the hotel itself. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. He pocketed the keycard and remote, his resolve steeling. The device upstairs was still frozen at 2:58, but he couldn't assume it was safe, not with a failsafe like this in play. He had to get back to it, disarm it fully, and find out who was behind this chaos. The spiral symbol was his only lead, a thread connecting the pieces, and he'd follow it wherever it led. As he moved toward the passage, the rumble grew louder, the floor shaking beneath him. Dust trickled from the ceiling and a sharp crack split the air, a pipe bursting somewhere nearby, steam hissing violently. The hotel was fighting back, its aging systems pushed to the brink by the man's sabotage. Keanu broke into a run, the chamber blurring past him, his mind focused on one goal: get upstairs, stop the device, and end this before the storm consumed everything. He reached the sealed door and slammed the keycard into a reader on this side, the mechanism grinding open just enough for him to slip through. The passage beyond was a haze of steam and flickering lights, but he pressed on, his boots pounding the grates. The timer in his mind, 2:58, loomed large, a silent threat still ticking in spirit if not in reality. He didn't know what the new rumble meant, but he knew it wasn't good. As he neared the end of the passage, a figure emerged from the shadows ahead, a woman, her silhouette familiar, her voice cutting through the chaos. "You're still here," she said, stepping into the red glow of an emergency light. It was the woman from the rooftop, her eyes sharp, her expression unreadable. "I told you the storm was coming." Keanu slowed, his breath steady despite the adrenaline. "What do you know about this?" he demanded, holding up the keycard. "Who's behind it?" She tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. "More than you're ready to hear, but if you want to stop it, you'll need me." She stepped closer, her gaze locking onto his. "The device upstairs, it's not what you think, and neither am I." The rumble intensified, a deep groan reverberating through the walls, and Keanu's instincts screamed at him to move. He didn't trust her, not yet, but he couldn't deny she knew more than he did. "Then prove it," he said, his voice firm. "Help me stop this." Her smile widened, a glint of something dangerous in her eyes. "Follow me," she said, turning back into the shadows. "But keep up, because we're running out of time." Keanu hesitated for only a heartbeat before following, the keycard clutched in his hand, the spiral symbol burning into his palm. The hotel's secrets were unraveling faster now, and he was diving deeper into the storm with no way back. The city sprawled before them, a glittering labyrinth beneath a twilight sky. Keanu Reeves and the woman emerged from the tunnel beneath the hotel, the cool night air a sharp contrast to the oppressive heat they'd left behind. But there was no time to pause. Sirens wailed in the distance, and streetlights flickered erratically, signs that the city was already slipping into chaos. Phase 2, Grid Active, had begun. Keanu's boots hit the pavement, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. The communicator in the woman's hand beeped, its screen flashing Grid Active in stark red letters. "It's an EMP," he said, piecing it together, his voice steady despite the urgency. "An electromagnetic pulse. They're going to take down the whole city's power grid." The woman's jaw tightened as she tapped the device. "The signal, coming from the old broadcast tower on the hill, that's where it's happening." She pointed to a faint silhouette in the distance, a skeletal structure piercing the horizon. "Then that's where we're going," Keanu replied, already moving. They darted through the streets, the city's pulse faltering around them. Lights buzzing, cars stalling, people shouting in confusion as the EMP's early effects took hold. A police barricade blocked their path, officers scrambling to maintain order. Keanu approached, his presence commanding attention. An officer recognized him, hesitating. "Mr. Reeves." "There's an EMP device at the broadcast tower," Keanu said, cutting through the chaos. "We need to get there now." The officer nodded, ushering them into an SUV. The vehicle sped off, weaving through the darkening streets toward the hill. In the car, the woman finally spoke, her voice low. "I owe you the truth. I'm not just some stranger. I've been tracking this group, the Coil, for months. The spiral symbol, it's their mark. The hotel was their base, and I was undercover trying to stop them." Keanu met her gaze, the pieces clicking into place. "And the device?" "Real," she said. "A prototype for this EMP. You getting involved wasn't part of their plan, it gave us an edge." A faint smile crossed his lips. "Good to know I'm still unpredictable." The SUV stopped at the hill's base, the tower rising above them. "Road blocked," the officer said. Keanu and the woman didn't hesitate, leaping out and racing up the path on foot. The communicator's signal grew stronger, guiding them to a rusted gate at the tower's base. A shadow slipped through a side door. Keanu pointed and they followed. Inside, the air thrummed with electricity. Servers lined the walls, screens glowing with the spiral symbol. At the room's center stood a massive device, its core pulsing green, a ticking bomb ready to plunge the city into darkness. A figure turned from the controls, the hotel concierge, his polite demeanor replaced by a sneer. "You're too late, Reeves," he said. "The coil will remake this city in chaos." Keanu stepped forward unshaken. "It's not over yet." The concierge smirked, hand hovering near a remote on his belt. "This triggers the final pulse. You can't stop it." The woman whispered, "The kill switch, it's that remote." Keanu's eyes locked on it, his body tensing. In a flash, he lunged, tackling the concierge as the man reached for the device. They crashed to the floor, fists flying. The remote skidded away. The concierge clawed at Keanu, drawing blood, but Keanu's resolve held firm. With a final punch, he knocked the man out, grabbing the remote. "Catch," he shouted, tossing it to the woman. She slammed it into the console, the device's hum faltering, then dying. The green light faded and silence fell. They stood there, breathing hard, the weight of their victory sinking in. "We did it," she said, a shaky laugh escaping her. Keanu wiped blood from his face, nodding. "Yeah, we did." Outside, the city's lights stabilized, dawn breaking over the horizon. The coil's plan had failed, their mastermind defeated. Keanu and the woman stepped into the morning light, a quiet understanding between them. "What now?" he asked. "I keep fighting," she said, smiling faintly. "You?" "I'll be ready for the next storm," he replied. With a nod, they parted, two heroes forged in shadow, their story complete, but their spirits unbroken. If you enjoyed this story, there's another video on screen right now. Go ahead and give it a look for an even more astonishing tale. And don't forget, we'll have many more uplifting and dramatic stories coming your way. So make sure you subscribe to our channel, that way you'll never miss our newest uploads.